Steve Jones, Senior Director of Industry Insight Research at Dodge Analytics, to talk about the key trends in the global construction industry. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Amanda.
I'll give you that.
Good. So as you heard before, I'm Steve Jones. I've been in this industry my entire career. Most of it I spent in architecture and engineering with a big firm up in the Northeast that then became the major component of Stantec when they came into the US. I took the dot-com plunge at the end of the century and went with Primavera, which was an amazing experience for me because they're so global. There's no big project anywhere that isn't using Primavera. So that really helped me understand what this whole global construction industry is all about. And now for the last 19 years, I've been with Dodge and I run our research group. And we have the very fascinating task of looking into all the very specific, interesting aspects of what's going on in our industry, because it's very difficult for anyone who's a practitioner to know really much about what's going on outside your own front yard and the projects that you have that you're working on, right? So we get to look into sustainability and technology and risk management and safety management and project delivery models. And the core that we're always trying to determine here is, what is it that's generating the most value, right? Because what can we go learn from hundreds of other people that we could share with you, so you could basically say, all right, here's about where I am on that journey, and it looks like the people just ahead of me are doing this and this, and they're not doing that and that, right? And so we try and help to provide some kind of a roadmap for that. We have a big team of economists, and we're pretty well known for our economic forecast. So what I'm going to do today is give you some highlights from what we're seeing coming for the next few years in the construction economy. And then I'm going to share some bits and pieces of some research we're doing with a focus on BIM, and then I'll give you my closing thoughts in terms of, I think, where we are with this whole digital journey that we're on as an industry. We are, as is no news to anyone, kind of teetering on the edge of a recession. We don't believe, as of today, that the factors in play at the moment necessarily majority vote go towards a recession, but it will definitely be some degree of slowing down next year. We're still looking at probably a final GDP of about 2% this year. And that's certainly less than last year, but we don't look at this as if we're going into another one of these sort of COVID crashes or the Great Recession type of crash in any way. And I'll share what that means in terms of some of the specific aspects of it. But I mean, there are positives. Individuals are generally in fairly good financial shape. We're not over leveraged as family units, right? There's a pretty high savings rate. There is an incredibly high demand for labor, right? So it's not as if people are going to be forced to lay people off and there'll be a big jump in unemployment or anything. And there is finally a commitment to some solid infrastructure spending. But at the same time, as we all know, we're looking at a much more inflationary environment. Interest rates have gone up and they may be leveling off at this point. There is clearly a skilled labor shortage. As we pointed out before, you can't take somebody who's been pumping gas and say, oh, you want to weld tomorrow? It doesn't happen that way for our industry. We do have, in this country at least, a slowing demographic, right? Population's growing rapidly, to Sunil's point, in many other parts of the country. Regardless of what side of the political spectrum you're on, I simply say the two words Washington, D.C., and that speaks for itself in terms of the difficulty that we have in getting any help from the top down for our industry. And the geopolitical situation, of course, can bring what they call the black swan, right, which is the unpredictable element that comes into our economy and affects us. Talking first and foremost about inflation, because that comes right down to where we all live. We've done an interesting study recently that just came out a couple weeks ago where we addressed top business issues just for specialty trade contractors. And I know we have a lot of you folks in the room today, but we looked at what's going on with profitability, what's going on with workforce, and what's going on with technology. This, by the way, is what we learned in 4 different countries around the world, US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, in terms of typical profit margins, and you can see it does definitely vary by trade, but 21% is the reported average across all these companies. What you though get is all kinds of erosion invaders, and one of those clearly is material cost inflation. Supply chain issues in general, but material cost inflation, totally uncharted waters for us at this point. So when we ask those trade contractors, what percentage of projects are you not able to pass on material cost increases that you incur to the owner? And the numbers were far higher than I expected to see. I'm probably not telling most of you things you don't already know, but again, that really varies by steel, by trade. And steel seems to be the ones who suffer the most, and they are unfortunately in one of the most volatile cost environments too. But these are the percentages who at least 20 to 50% or 50% or more of their projects, they're not able to pass on those cost increases. They have to absorb those. So that's major erosion. And when we asked about a number of different factors that act as profit eroders to especially trade contractors, these three were in that group. There are material shortages, delays, price fluctuations, the fact that internally we're not doing as good a job as we could in estimating in the first place, and then we don't really have efficient procurement, right? So these are the kinds of core problems that end up eroding your profit. So we did ask trade contractors, again, in all four of these countries, what are you going to be doing in the next 12 months to deal with this fact that you have? And as you can see here, these are color-coded and go across the 5 different trades that we talked to. But they're raising prices in bids came out number 1. I won't ask for a show of hands here, right? But just know that this really is a trend, along with suggesting alternate products that you can get. Increasing the number of suppliers that you work with, right, to hope to get more bids on things, increase the amount of inventory that you're now going to hold, where you're going to actually invest capital yourself, right, in building your own inventory so you're not subject to that fluctuation. Buying directly from manufacturers instead of going through distributors. And then lastly, and I talked to a couple of people at the reception last night who were doing this, turning down work, right? Almost unheard of in this industry, but a fair amount of people here, 31% across all the trades, are basically turning down work because they know they're not going to be able to deliver against those needs. So at Dodge, we're the biggest business intelligence company out there that focuses specifically on our industry. We track projects, millions of them, through this cycle. In that initial stage, when they're still in planning and design, we produce an index every month we call the Momentum Index, which is the number of projects we see coming into that early stage, right? Good news is here it tracks all the way back to 2007, right? So you can get to see this over a long period, what the Great Recession did to it, boom, and COVID pushed it down a little bit, that other gray bar, but it's actually generally on the rise. Now this is especially true for any of you who work in civil engineering. We do a quarterly kind of a business dive, and this is a free report on the civil industry, and we ask, what's your backlog right now based on what you would traditionally consider your ideal backlog? And even 9 months ago, civil engineers were still only at 85% of what they would consider to be ideal, what they'd like to have. They're at 150 now. I mean, there is a ton of work in the engineering pipeline, which is going to be moving into construction in this space. We also track starts, right? Because that's a known fact. When the shovel breaks the ground, that project is actually going ahead, right? And so I'll share some of what we're seeing in terms of starts and what we believe in terms of projections going forward. We think starts are, when we finish out this year and close the books on this year, I think this will be an 8% increase in starts this year, right? Which is pretty good going back here to 2017. We think that there will continue to be increases, though much more muted next year. In the residential sector, we're predicting about a 2% lift. And this is how we see it going. The red bar is where we are right now. And this is how we see that going out for the next 5 years. Residential is important, even though many of you probably don't have anything to do with building them, but that's where everything else goes, right? Where the residential is getting built is where the hospitals go, and the schools go, and the roads go, and the stores go, and the hotels go, and the office buildings go, right? So this, and it's also the biggest sector of our construction economy. So we feel very important about tracking that because it is the generator of so much other types of business. In terms of non-residential buildings, we're looking at that. It had a good jump this year, 19%. We believe it'll be up this year. Only up about 2% next year, right? But still, that's better than going down. I'll take you through some of those. We think going out in the future, though, that has a pretty strong upward curve over the next 5 years. And I'll show you some of the various parts and pieces. The shaded area is the forecasted zone. You can see healthcare will be particularly strong. People like myself are not getting any younger. We're going to need more healthcare. There's going to be a lot of distributed healthcare, a lot more in those clinic-type facilities and the smaller satellite facilities and things of that nature, as well as, science-driven improvements in main facilities. Education and dormitory spending, highly volatile, but we're seeing that reasonably strong over the next 5 years. Transportation is going to be very strong. You can see here a really good pattern of uplift there. Government buildings themselves still trending up over the next 5 years, but not as much as the transportation side. Office construction we're seeing very strong, but believe me, it's not the traditional office building. This is data center driven, because we put data centers into the office sector. When you look at the top starts from this year, 8 out of 10 of the biggest projects were data centers, and that will continue to be, in our estimation, a pretty good business. Hotels, which got whacked really badly with COVID, they're very economic sensitive and travel sensitive. We're actually looking at a pretty good lift again in that over the next 5 years. Manufacturing, onshoring, right? Bringing manufacturing back to the United States is actually a great trend and is going to be very helpful to continued manufacturing construction. Warehouse construction, though, it was on this ridiculous tear, as you can see, since the beginning of the e-commerce era. It just exploded, but it got overbuilt. I mean, if you've heard, Amazon basically just gave back 10 million square feet of space they can't even use. That's definitely got overbuilt, and that one's going to be trending down. So if you rode that going up, that's great. But to the point earlier about diversifying, this is probably not a place that you can plan on continuing to have a happy ride in that space. And store construction, which, as you can see here, got really creamed largely because of e-commerce replacing it, and kind of bumped along the bottom. It's one of those things that follows residential construction, right? So it's not going to be a terrible place to be. It's not one of your highest growth areas, right? But it is not a terrible place to be. In terms of the non-building, we're seeing that's where the biggest growth is going to be next year. We're looking at a 15% increase in starts next year. This is a gauge we've begun to use in our publications, showing how many of the dollars that have been pledged towards public transit, roads and bridges, EV charging stations, water facilities have actually now been implemented, right? So we're kind of in the early stages of that money actually hitting the market. But highway and bridge construction starts, we're looking at really, really strong for the next 4 years. It'll start to taper off, right, as that money gets to the point where it's been spent now. But this is a super hot market to be in for the next few years. Anything to do with water is also well-funded, and it's going to be a really strong market. This top DRRH is our sort of Dodge speak for dams, reservoirs, river and harbor projects, but then sewers and water. And electric power gas is going to be relatively flat, which again, it's not, flat's not bad, right? Flat's the new great when you're looking at some economic pressure. So you'll see a lot of money being spent on distribution, things of that nature, some work around alternative as this goes forward. But overall, we're looking at this as the picture for our construction economy over these next years. Right? So some of those good markets helping, hardly any of them tracking really hard down, with the exception of commercial warehouses. So let me share with you a little bit of the work that we've been doing recently specifically on BIM. We've put this report out, and again, it's free at that URL. So please, there's like 50, 60 reports up there of all kinds that are sponsored by folks who want us to go do this kind of quantitative research and share it with the industry. So this on construction.com, Toolkit and Reports is a really great site for you. We surveyed 641 BIM users. At this point, I've been doing BIM studies for 15 years. And we used to spend a lot of time talking to the people who aren't using it yet. Well, what do you need? What do you need? I'm like, we're not even talking to them anymore. It's like, take your Betamax, take it down to the Goodwill, get your 50% deduction. Will you please just get with the program? So this was just a deep dive into people who are actually using BIM on their projects. And we did it in North America, Asia, EMEA. There were about 70% of them were buildings focused, about 30% civil focused, and we had a really good range here of different company sizes. So we really tried to take the temperature of BIM users en masse out there. The focus of this one was on really that I in BIM. Like, what are you doing specifically with that information? How are you deploying that successfully? All right. And then we used a few different parameters to get a sense of who's doing what. And one of the first parameters was, how long have you been doing this? Another one was what we call intensity, which is, all right, here's all your projects. How many of them are you deploying BIM on? All right, how deep in the BIM pool are you? All right, and then we put out this list of 21 specific activities and said, to what degree are you using that tool for that activity? And we refer to that as engagement, right? So it's one thing to have it and to say you're using it on a project, but what are you actually doing with it, right? Because we wanted to get down to that level. Now that gives us the ability to kind of build this entire spectrum and then see, all right, at this end, these are the benefits they're getting, these are the challenges they're facing. Down here, oh, less benefits. Yeah, because it gets better as you get deeper in the pool, things like that. So I'll share some of those initial sort of filter parameters with you, and then we'll get into what people are doing in terms of data exchange in the cloud, where they're finding the value of BIM for safety, for instance, things like that. So I'll take you through each of these quickly here. Interestingly, as the architects, my firm was one of the first ones to start using BIM back in the mid-90s. We were a Bentley shop, and they just bought a company in England, and they asked us to come do a project. And so you can see the architects have been doing it for a really, really long time. Civil engineers are the ones who have most recently caught up. The smaller companies have tended to lag the larger companies, which is the case in many sorts of technologies here. You can see with those who are in their 2018 or later, that tends to be the smaller companies. That intensity is always interesting, and this is just a summary chart here of those who said, yeah, we're using BIM on at least half our projects. And so here's where the average across that was about half of the respondents said they're using it on at least half their projects, led by architects, trailing a little bit more by the civil engineers and contractors, only 41%. But then we said, all right, what do you think you're going to be doing, all right, 3 years from now? Boom, everybody who's in the pool is going to be swimming down to the deeper end. So the average at that point, when we asked them where are you going to be 3 years out, that's almost 80% of my projects out, right? So it's getting to be, this is a standard operating procedure. Thank God, it's only taken 20 years to get there. When we look into what's the impact of that BIM intensity on benefits, as I said before, we like to then take those parameters and we like to say, all right, who's getting what kind of benefits based on how deep in the pool they are. That darker bar is folks who are doing 75% or more of their projects, and that light one is those who are in the very shallow end of the pool. And you can see it's just really clear, right? The more that you do this on your projects, the better benefits you get, right? Improved ability to manage complexity, which we've heard about already this morning. These projects aren't getting simpler to do, right? Improved design quality, reduced errors in rework, right? Which is the biggest element of profit erosion, by the way, we discovered in that other study. Better ability to meet customer and design requirements, which are getting more stringent and demanding all the time. And increased stakeholder buy-in, right? A huge number of stakeholders, more so all the time on these projects. You get them around that campfire, right? And then for contractors, same thing. A big difference between those who are in the deep end of the pool and those who are still up in the kiddie pool. Reduced number of constructability issues on site. Amen. That's basically all you would need as a benefit, if nothing else, right? And then reduced defects at handover, right? As Bimal talked about, the importance of being able to move this data forward, right, into that digital twin. Increased percentage of successful projects overall, reduced non-recoverable costs. That was the biggest difference, right, between the people who are still in the kiddie pool and the people who are in the adult end, right? And then just improved cost control overall, which is so critically important to everything. In terms of engagement with activities, again, this time around, we really wanted to get specific about who's doing what. To what degree. So we laid out this whole list, right? And we basically broke it into 4 kinds of categories here. So some of them would apply to everybody because we had all 5 food groups here taking this survey. So we want to make sure there were enough things that everybody did, so it was relatively equal opportunity there. And then what you see here is the darker bar is how many were at what we're calling a medium engagement. At least they're doing at least 4 to 6 of those activities. And then the high engagement, they're doing 7 or more of the ones that apply to them. Not of this. The whole list didn't apply to everybody, but of those that applied to them, right? And so, in terms of that, at least medium or high, you're going between about 1/3 to 57% of people, right? The reason we like to do this is we can come back now in a couple of years and say, oh, good, we're making progress, or who's making progress on that. But this is the first time we've ever baselined usage on real specific activities. The larger companies are, again, kind of leading the way in that quite a bit here, 60% of the bigger companies versus the smaller companies. And in terms of that medium engagement and high engagement, it maps, again, pretty powerfully to some meaningful benefits, right? I get an improved win rate, right? Sunil said you got to win the work before you do the work. I got much increased bid efficiency, right? Because I actually have people talking about something that's consistent and the same each time. I get much better stakeholder engagement, and I get a reduced number of constructability issues, amen, on site, right? It's just so clear, right, that the more you're doing, not only on your projects, but the more things you're doing on your projects, the better life gets. So what are other things that people are doing? To what degree are people taking advantage of cloud technologies, all right? So we asked everybody, to what degree are you, how frequently are you participating by using the cloud to exchange data with either regulatory agencies that you have to deal with, or the clients, or the rest of the team members, or just internally in your own team, right? And it varies a lot here across between the architects, between the MEP and the structural engineers, between civil engineers and contractors. Again, it's emerging, right? We're gonna get to where it's just like across the board. We'll get there, but this is that kind of snapshot of that jaggedy process that we're going through in this digital transformation. Safety, we do a safety study every 2 years for a big national organization. We are really committed to helping people understand how all the things that they're doing can contribute to safety. So we'll always ask about it in almost every survey we do, regardless of the topic. We'll try and tie it back to safety. So in this case, we said, just to the contractors, because they're the knowledgeable ones to respond to this, to what degree are you seeing these safety-related aspects because of the fact that you are using BIM, and we're getting some better numbers than we have typically gotten in the past. Safety has always been one of those, yeah, not so much. It's been getting better over the years. This is some of the better results that we've got in terms of, yeah, we're actually now able to tie our use of this digital technology to better safety performance. Something we haven't ever done before either, this was the first time we did it, was we said, okay, you're pretty good. How's everybody else on your team? What do you expect them to bring day one? And are they bringing that day one? We never did that before. And I was very curious as to what we were going to start to find out. All right. So here's the percentage who, and so, for instance, an architect would answer this for everybody else. Right? A structural engineer would answer this for everybody else that you see here. Right? They're talking about the folks that they work with. How frequently do you expect that they're going to come to the table absolutely BIM savvy, right? Complete ability to use that BIM tool. Architects, people have a pretty high expectation, right? And it makes sense. They've been using it longest, and they have to generate the design. And so that and the structural engineer are both north of 70%. All right, say, I expect an architect to show up ready to go, right? And then it begins to trail off down to owners for design and construction, a little bit higher for those in O&M. I can take that, and that's where the interesting future is going to be. But it's interesting where this is right now. And then we also said, all right, maybe they can't actually operate it, but can they function in that environment, right? Can they read it at least and deal with it, right? And that begins to pump things up really higher. So almost nobody is being given a hall pass, right, on an inability completely to deal. The design and construction owner, only 77% even expect one or the other out of that, right? But most everybody else, at least 90%, have that expectation. Come on, please show up ready to play, okay? And we said, well, okay, now that you've told us what you expect, how satisfied are you with what you're actually experiencing? And this is a pretty big gap, all right? I can't tell you how to fix that. All we can do is kind of report on what we're finding, all right? But the level of satisfaction isn't meeting its expectation right now by pretty magical big numbers there. Bimal, I wanted to point out the fact that I did write in the text here that, increased use of outsourced modeling expertise can more quickly address this skills gap. All right. Always thinking of you, buddy. One of the things we have been asking all along for all 15 years we've been doing this is where are you putting your money, right? Because it's follow the money. What are you investing in, both in terms of processes and in technology, because they're different, right? And so here's what we found out. We took the responses and scaled them on a 1 to 100 scale here, so for some relative comparison purposes. In terms of technology, just getting the software and then customizing it. All right, here's where you'll see a lot of differences. And in many ways, the architects aren't spending their money there because they've done that, right? They don't have that need. MEP and structural engineers, still, a lot of them are going to be buying more software and doing more customization, as well as contractors. Then we get into custom content libraries, right, that work for you and work for your types. That's, again, where MEP and structural engineers are very, very strong. Also civil engineers. So what that's saying is they're feeling like there isn't content out there for them that they can take advantage of, that they've got to do themselves. That's kind of the message we take away. And architects, pretty high on that index score too. Contractors, not so much. And then lastly, are you doing the hardware side as well? And architects actually surprise us because they're actually going to be putting more money into that than anything else. And I think a lot of it has to do with processing power, right, that they have to actually have in order to make these much more complex models and integrate more effectively with other people. And then in terms of processes, here's where sort of the leveling is around training. Here's where developing your own internal processes so that your company can be an effective digital company. And then in between all the other players on your teams, collaborative processes, right? And you can see the civil engineers are really leading across all these. Very interesting, is they lagged in terms of adoption of these technologies, but it appears right now they're on a pretty strong growth curve in terms of getting ready, which is very good because we're about to spend like $1 trillion on infrastructure, and I'm very happy to see civil engineers getting engaged in this stuff at this point. And then we have been, since we began this process 15 years ago, been asking people about the ROI. Now, there is no ROI in this industry, right? So we are very specific to call it perceived. So it's really, how does it feel to you, really? Because everybody would, 10 people would measure it 20 ways. But the level I call meh, the low to break even to negative, unfortunately, the MEP and the structural engineers have the most people who are still saying, I'm spending more value than I'm getting here, right? These numbers, the below the line numbers, used to be a lot bigger in earlier studies. So it's nice that those are getting almost to zero, but the MEP and structural engineers still have a ways to go to get to where they're even breaking even there. You get to that next level with that sort of the mediums and then the highs. And then lastly, those who are really killing it, they're optimizing, right? That's, again, mostly architects because they've been at it the longest. It makes sense, right? But again, you got some real variation going on between the various types. We're not moving forward as an industry. We're moving forward in fits and starts by companies and by trades and things of that nature. So, we're getting there, but again, it's a little jagged as we move. In terms of those who are in that very, very high ROI, that does tend, again, to be those who are doing more work, right? Have a higher BIM intensity, right? 50% or more of their projects versus those who are in the shallow end of the pool. And also in terms of those who've had it longer. And then we also wanted to find out, all right, how does the use of other innovative things going on tie to that engagement with BIM, all right? Because this digital journey is not about doing this over here and doing that over there. It's just too slow, right? You've got to look. We're hoping people are looking at this as a digital transformation, right? So what other things are BIM users doing? And we went through a few different types of things, what we call just design intelligence tools, like the model-based simulation, the VR, AR, and mixed R, the generative design, AI and machine learning, things like that. And you see, some pretty big differences between those. Here is one thing we did ask non-BIM users. And you can see those who are engaged in BIM are also definitely leading use in some of these other things. Around innovative construction, DFMA, or model-driven prefab, or industrialized construction, again, mapping very much more strongly to those who are using BIM, and although not a lot using now, a whole lot expecting to be using 2 or 3 years from now. A correlation between BIM use and innovative job site stuff, right? Are you doing any 3D printing? Are you using reality capture? You have any kind of wearable model devices? Are you doing any kind of robotics or automated vehicles, right, like that? Again, you can see a lot of difference between those who are already engaged in BIM are leading that much more so than their non-BIM peers. And although not a lot of use right now other than reality capture, pretty good slug of planned use over the next few years. People want to get into it. And then that sort of turnover, the digital twin, right? The smart building technology. To what degree are you actually engaged in digital twin? Although again, right now, if you ask 10 people for a definition of digital twin, you'll get 20 definitions. That one has yet to be kind of coalesced. Any kind of IoT, any kind of sort of sensors that you're putting in, any kind of sort of virtual assistants, right? So again, you're seeing that those who are using BIM are doing more of those, right? But it's a lot more in the next few years than it is right now. So again, please download this study. They're free. This has all kinds of amazing case studies in it. It's got some really interesting interviews with folks. It's got some deep dive sidebar articles into some of these topic areas that you see. So let me finish up with just a few of my thoughts on where we are on this whole digital transformation that we're going through. The good news is the future's already here, but as we have just seen, it is not evenly distributed, right? So everybody's moving at some pace, right? But there's no such thing as where the construction industry is, because every company is basically on its own path in its own way. So we're trying to track the whole thing. I think when you look at this overall journey, the first phase is just getting out of manual and at least automating. I think automating is an important concept for an awful lot of manual processes, right? That study that we just did on trades, this is the breakdown to how many of those 5 types of trades said that they're using some kind of software for their key pre-con, project execution, and performance analysis stuff, right? 61% are using an actual software, either something that they adapted or something that they bought that was purpose-built. The rest, though, they're still working off of spreadsheets, whiteboards, paper, right? I mean, there's still a lot of it going on. When you break down those numbers of that 61%, you can see, between pre-con, execution, and analysis, it varies, again, a lot between the various 5 trades that we interviewed, right? It's not necessarily really consistent. And to Bimal's point earlier, the problem with automation is it builds these little silos of excellence, right? And it's not necessarily about what the very important next phase, which I like to say, if I had to say the industry, I think the industry is really enmeshed right now in this next phase, which is integrating and connecting, right? We did a very interesting set of studies. Again, these are all free. Please go get these, download them. We did a big survey globally, and we took the data and broke it up into various perspectives here on connected construction, integrated digital workflows, right? That's the magic that's actually going to make this stuff work. How do you move data effectively between people and take these analog workflows and make them digital, right? And so we've got these. Because what we did was we created this kind of spectrum that goes from either you're just using a single platform and running everything on it, or at least if you've got a bunch of different tools, you've invested in connecting them. You've built those integrations, right? They're functioning kind of like a jalopy version of a platform, right? Versus the rest that are, I got a bunch of different softwares and I'm not really connecting them, or I only have a few softwares, or I got almost nothing. I'm still working with paper, right? So those who have that's very high engagement with technology for conducting virtual workflows, that kind of red box I had there, owners were actually the ones who came out the strongest for that, having consolidated onto at least an integrated set of tools or a main tool, right? And it comes down, especially trades, unfortunately, lag in that. In terms of using digital workflows to exchange externally with the rest of your project team, you'd like to see everybody over there on the right side with that 75% or more of our project data is being exchanged in some way like this. But we still got a lot of work to do to get there. I mean, even the 50% or more, right? That's kind of light green. I mean, those are too small, right? We got to drive more of this in the industry. Because really, those are pretty small numbers here for people doing half or more of their data being driven through some kind of platform. Because that's what's keeping us from getting to this next stage. The next stage is the meta stage. All right, that's where we're taking advantage of Spot, the robot. Right? That's where we're taking advantage of AI. Right? That's where basically you just don't have all this reinvention of the wheel, and you don't have all these coordination problems, right? Because you've got intelligent technology behind it. You have a design intent, all right? Use the technology to help you make the key decisions and to keep track of everything and keep it coordinated, right? To know that when you've got a duct run, it needs hangers. Model the hangers in, right? Don't worry about paying somebody to sit there and model every individual hangar one at a time. If it changes, the hangars will change, right? Don't worry about having to pay somebody extra because now they have to go into the model and change every single hangar, right? Let's let technology being taken care of all this stuff, doing all the constructability reviews, running all the energy analysis, doing all the quantity takeoffs, right? And any change that you make, it ripples through everything instantly, right? This is where we will get to. This is the point at which when people are building this way and you try and explain to them how it has to used to be done on fax machines and stuff, they'll think you're making that shit up. They will not believe us, right? This will just be like, well, duh, it was always done this way, right? But what we're living through right now, we're in the most exciting time that the biggest industry on the planet Earth, has ever had. We're it. You guys, you're helping to drive this change towards this meta future, which at that point everybody will take for granted, right? But you're the pioneers helping to make that happen, right? And so always remember how important a role you're playing right now in the work that you're doing. And again, take advantage of these reports on every topic under the sun out there. They're all free. This is my email. This is all I do 24/7. So if you ever want to talk to me about anything or have ideas on what needs to be researched or whatever, just please get in touch with me. This is all I do, and I love it. And so thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Steve, so much. Steve, we'd like to give you a little thank you and appreciation of you coming and presenting for us.
Hi, Steve. How are you? Nice meeting you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Steve.